Hello everyone, and welcome back to Creepy Mr. Night. I know many of you enjoy using these videos to help you sleep, so before you drift off, I thought it'd be fun for everyone to leave a comment, letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. Now, let's get comfy, relax, and begin. Story 1. David Whitley was not just a name, he was a nightmare. His crimes, brutal and methodical, had left a trail of terror across the country. The media dubbed him the Butcher after his grotesque signature. His victims, always chosen at random, were found mutilated, each death meticulously orchestrated with a cold precision that sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened law enforcement officers. The terror was personal for many, but none more so than Detective Sarah Miller. She had been the one to track him down, piece together his twisted puzzle, and ultimately bring him to justice. It had taken years to finally corner Whitley. He had evaded capture multiple times, slipping through the fingers of police forces in every state. But when he was finally apprehended in a quiet suburb, locked in a high-security facility, it felt like the world could breathe a little easier. The infamous killer was behind bars, and it seemed like nothing could ever tear him free. The prison, known for its impenetrable walls and state-of-the-art security, was the last place anyone thought Whitley could escape. His solitary confinement cell was under constant surveillance. 24-hour guards, motion sensors, and cameras that tracked every movement. No one in the prison could have imagined that the world would be thrown into chaos by a single event, one that should have been impossible. But one night, it happened. At exactly 3:14 a.m., the alarms went off. Guards scrambled through the halls, their radios crackling with frantic instructions. A single door, locked and fortified, had somehow been breached. Detective Miller, called in immediately, stood frozen as she looked at the monitor showing the empty cell. Whitley was gone. His bed was undisturbed, his clothes neatly folded, and the small scraps of paper where he had once written cryptic messages now littered the floor. The camera footage showed nothing, no sign of struggle, no shadowy figure sneaking out, nothing that could explain the disappearance of one of the most dangerous men alive. The investigation began the moment Sarah Miller set foot in the prison. Warden John Pritchard, a man whose entire career had been built on the impeccable reputation of his institution, was in a state of panic. He was quick to declare it an inside job, but every corner he turned, there were more questions than answers. "This is impossible," Pritchard said, his voice shaking as he watched the screen. How could he get out? The doors were locked. The cameras were working. It doesn't make sense. Detective Miller remained silent, her mind already working on the many possibilities. Something didn't sit right with her. Whitley was a master manipulator, but he wasn't just a killer. He was playing a long game, one that had yet to unfold fully. "We need to search every inch of this place," Miller said, her voice steady, despite the chaos unfolding around her. "Start with the staff. Someone here must have been involved." But the more she dug, the more she realized how carefully Whitley had planned his escape. No stone would go unturned, no corner left unexplored. The deeper she went into the prison's records, the more she discovered troubling inconsistencies. There were strange gaps in the security footage, missing logs from the night of Whitley's disappearance, and a disturbing connection to several prison guards who had recently been reassigned or transferred. As she continued her investigation, Dr. Elena Ruiz, the psychologist who had treated Whitley during his incarceration, became a critical part of the puzzle. Sarah wasn't convinced at first. Ruiz had worked with Whitley extensively, and her belief in his ability to manipulate was well known. But the more Ruiz spoke about his behavior, the more Sarah felt the eerie weight of something hidden beneath the surface. "There's more to him than you think," Dr. Ruiz said, her voice tinged with frustration. "Whitley wasn't just in prison to serve time. He was playing everyone. He was planting seeds." "Seeds?" Sarah repeated, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "Elusive," Dr. Ruiz began, her eyes narrowing as if lost in a memory. "You know how Whitley thinks. Everything he does is calculated. But when I spoke to him, when I treated him, there was something deeper. I think he knew he wouldn't stay behind bars forever. It was all a game to him. His escape, his silence. It was all part of something much larger." Sarah took a long, deep breath, staring at the walls of the interrogation room as the weight of Ruiz's words began to settle. Suddenly, the pieces began to fall into place. Whitley hadn't just escaped from a prison. He had escaped a system. And somehow, in the process, he had made sure that no one would understand how or why. As the investigation gained momentum, Miller uncovered a series of cryptic letters Whitley had written during his time in solitary confinement. At first glance, they appeared to be incoherent ramblings, disjointed, nonsensical sentences. But as she spent more time with them, she noticed a pattern. Whitley had been trying to communicate something, a message hidden within his madness. "The keys are where the light can't reach," Sarah whispered aloud as she read the most recent letter. "What does it mean?" Her gut twisted as she examined the letter closer. The keys could be literal, but where could they be? And why had Whitley chosen to leave such a trail behind when he was so meticulous? The chaos that followed Whitley's escape left no room for answers. Warden Pritchard continued to deny any possibility of an inside job, choosing to cling to the idea that the escape was an unprecedented fluke, a bizarre incident that would soon be forgotten. But Sarah Miller knew better. Whitley was still out there, and the true horror of his plan was only just beginning. Detective Sarah Miller spent the following days immersing herself in the investigation, slowly piecing together what remained of the fractured puzzle that Whitley had left behind. She found herself haunted by the cryptic messages he'd left in his letters, the way they twisted and bent her thoughts like a maze she couldn't escape. But in the back of her mind, something else kept nagging at her. This wasn't just a well-planned escape. There was something far darker and more insidious lurking in the shadows. Whitley's disappearance felt like the first move in a much larger, far more dangerous game. It was early morning when she received the call that would change everything. "Detective Miller, you need to see this." Officer Harris's voice crackled through the phone. Miller grabbed her jacket and rushed to the prison. She was met by Harris in the prison's evidence room, where a collection of items had been gathered from Whitley's cell. On a table, neatly arranged, was a stack of guards' uniforms, each one freshly pressed, as if they had just been delivered. Beneath them, a strange thin layer of dust seemed to mark their surface, untouched by anyone's hands for days. "I don't understand," Miller said, inspecting the uniforms. "How is this related to Whitley's escape?" Harris handed her a folder. Inside were security photos, images from the hours leading up to the escape. The photos showed guards, their faces masked or obscured, moving through the halls of the prison. But there was something chilling about the images. The figures moving through the camera's line of sight were not the regular guards. They wore identical uniforms to the ones now on the table, but these people were not supposed to be on duty. "An inside job?" Sarah murmured, staring at the grainy images. But who could have? Before she could finish her thought, her phone buzzed. It was Dr. Elena Ruiz. "Detective, I have something important," Ruiz said, her voice low and urgent. "You were right. Whitley's been playing everyone, and I think I've cracked it." Miller felt a jolt of tension in her chest. "Go on." "There's a pattern in his letters, in his conversations with me. I didn't see it at first, but I believe Whitley's not alone in this. There's someone on the outside, a network he's been in contact with. These people aren't just random accomplices. They're connected. They're organizing something bigger. Whitley's escape wasn't just about getting out. It was about sending a message." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of Ruiz's words sink in. "A message?" "Yes. He's not just running away, Sarah. He's starting something. You need to look deeper. There's a reason why he's always so calm, so in control. It's like he's been playing chess, but with real lives. And now, he's got the first piece in motion." With renewed urgency, Sarah returned to the prison. She knew it was time to start questioning the staff in earnest. Something about the prison felt off, like a pressure that had been building beneath the surface, ready to explode. That evening, Sarah sat down with Warden John Pritchard. She had hoped to press him for answers, but he was becoming more erratic by the hour, clinging desperately to his belief that this was an isolated incident. His face was drawn, his eyes wild, and there was an edge to his voice that hadn't been there when she first met him. "I told you, Detective," Pritchard said, his voice strained. "This is a freak accident, nothing more. How could I have known the guards were involved? You've already stirred up enough trouble. If we're not careful, it'll tear this entire place apart." Sarah leaned forward, watching him carefully. "Warden, I'm not here to make your job harder. I'm here to figure out what happened. But you have to understand, this was no accident. Whitley didn't escape by chance. Someone in this prison helped him, and that someone has blood on their hands." Pritchard's face tightened. "You're accusing me now, Detective? This is ridiculous. I've run this prison for years, and it's been spotless. You're barking up the wrong tree." But Sarah saw the fear flicker in his eyes. It wasn't the fear of being accused. It was the fear of something much bigger. "Warden, your prison may be spotless on the surface, but there's something rotten underneath," she said. "I'll find it, no matter how deep I have to dig. And when I do, you'll be the first one I hold accountable." She left the meeting feeling a chilling unease. There was more at play here than she had realized. Whitley's escape wasn't just a prison break. It was a carefully executed move in a much darker game. And now, the clock was ticking. Whitley was out there somewhere, his plan unfolding, and if she didn't act fast, she might lose him again. This time, permanently. Detective Sarah Miller didn't sleep much over the next few days. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Whitley's calm, unnerving face. The way he had taunted her during their interviews, always 2 steps ahead. The way his eyes glinted, as if he knew something she didn't. Each cryptic letter, each vague phrase, seemed to point towards something deeper, something bigger than just an escape. Sarah had a gnawing feeling that Whitley was orchestrating a larger scheme, one that could have far-reaching consequences. The guards, she soon discovered, weren't the only ones involved. The more she questioned the staff, the more strange things came to light. Prison records showed routine visits from contractors, plumbers, electricians, and maintenance workers, whose names were rarely questioned. But as she dug into their backgrounds, one name kept resurfacing: Thomas Gray. Gray had been one of the contractors called in to perform routine work on the prison's electrical systems just a month before Whitley's escape. On paper, he was a low-level electrician, nothing special. But Sarah's instincts told her otherwise. The man had been arrested multiple times for petty theft, and a more thorough background check revealed something unsettling. He had a history of connections to organized crime. That was no coincidence. There was something more here, something darkly intentional. Sarah arranged a visit to his last known address. It was a crumbling apartment building on the edge of town. Sarah knocked on the door with a sense of foreboding. A few moments passed before it creaked open, revealing a disheveled man in his early 40s, his eyes bloodshot and nervous. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Thomas Gray?" Sarah asked, not bothering with pleasantries. "We need to talk." He looked at her, fear flickering across his face before he stepped back, opening the door wide enough to let her inside. "I didn't do anything, okay?" Gray said quickly, wringing his hands. "I don't know what you're talking about. I was just fixing the wiring, just doing my job." Sarah stepped inside, her eyes scanning the dimly lit apartment. It was sparse, save for a few pieces of cheap furniture. But what stood out was the stack of newspapers in the corner, old editions of local papers with headlines about Whitley's escape, all neatly folded and clipped together. "Tell me what you know about Whitley," Sarah demanded, her tone sharp. Gray hesitated, glancing around as though expecting someone to burst through the door. I don't know much," he said, his voice faltering. "I was just hired to work on the electrical systems, nothing major. But, Whitley. I think someone helped him, someone inside. I think he had a plan for a while." "Who?" Sarah pressed, her patience running thin. Gray gulped. "I don't know the names, but I overheard things. Whitley was in touch with people, high-up people, not just inmates, guards too. They were always talking about something big, something that had been in motion for years." Sarah felt a chill crawl up her spine. This wasn't just an escape. This was the beginning of something much larger. "Tell me everything," Sarah said, taking a step closer. "Who were they?" Gray's eyes darted nervously to the side before he whispered, "I think it's bigger than just the prison. They were planning something outside, a network. I don't know all the details, but I heard talk about a new order being created, a revolution, something that would shake everything. That's why they needed Whitley. He was the face of it, the perfect man to be a symbol." Sarah's mind raced. A new order. Revolution? Could it be possible that Whitley's escape was meant to send a message, one that transcended his own life and crimes? This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about power, control, and something much more calculated. "Where is Whitley now?" she demanded. I don't know," Gray stammered, shaking his head. "But I'm telling you, he's just a pawn in all of this. He's the key, but he's also the distraction. Someone else is pulling the strings." Sarah felt a sickening knot form in her stomach. Whitley, as dangerous and twisted as he was, wasn't the true mastermind. He was just a player in someone else's game, a game that she had only just begun to understand. Back at the prison, Warden Pritchard had become more unhinged. His behavior had grown erratic, and his insistence that the escape was just a freak accident started to feel less like denial and more like desperation. Sarah confronted him once more. "You need to tell me everything, Pritchard," she said, her voice steady but forceful. "I know about Gray. I know about the contractors. And I know Whitley didn't escape on his own. Someone inside helped him. Someone close to you." Pritchard's face turned pale, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests of his chair. He was visibly sweating, the facade of control slipping from him. "You don't understand," he murmured, his voice trembling. "I didn't have a choice. They had leverage over me." "Leverage," Sarah repeated, her heart pounding. "Who? What are you talking about?" Pritchard swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the door, as though expecting someone to burst in at any moment. The people behind Whitley, the ones who helped him, they have people everywhere. Everywhere. They've been watching us for years. Sarah's pulse quickened. Who are these people? Pritchard looked at her, his eyes filled with fear. They're more powerful than you can imagine. Whitley wasn't just a killer. He was part of something much bigger, something that goes beyond the prison, beyond anything we know. If you keep digging, you'll never get out alive. The warning echoed in Sarah's mind as she left his office, her thoughts swirling. Whitley's escape was no longer just an escape. It was a signal, a piece in a much larger puzzle. There were powerful people out there, people whose reach extended far beyond the prison walls, and they were pulling the strings. Detective Sarah Miller could feel the weight of Pritchard's words lingering in her mind long after she left his office. Leverage. The prison was just a small part of something much more dangerous. Someone had been pulling strings, orchestrating not just Whitley's escape, but a larger, far-reaching plan. But who and why? The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, but every time Sarah thought she was close to understanding the full picture, another piece would fall into place that made everything more complicated. Days passed as she pored over records, spoke with more contractors, and retraced every lead she could find. But despite her best efforts, Whitley's whereabouts remained elusive. Her gut told her that he wasn't just hiding out in a safe house, waiting to fade into obscurity. No, this was part of something more methodical, and whoever was behind it knew exactly how to cover their tracks. Then, on a cold, rainy evening, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. The knock on her office door came at 9 p.m. When she opened it, she was surprised to see Dr. Elena Ruiz standing there, looking more disheveled than usual, her face a mixture of determination and fear. "Dr. Ruiz, what are you doing here?" Sarah asked, her surprise evident. "I need to talk to you," Ruiz said urgently, stepping inside before Sarah could respond. "And we need to move quickly. I've learned something about Whitley, and it's worse than we thought." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Worse? How could it be worse? Ruiz paced back and forth, her eyes scanning the room as though looking for something to hold on to. "You were right. This isn't just about Whitley. It's about the people who've been using him all along." Sarah sat down, her mind already racing. "What do you mean?" "I did some digging on my own, Sarah," Ruiz said, her voice quiet but intense. "And I think I found the mastermind. It's not someone you'd expect." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Who?" "Elise Grayson," Ruiz said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The prison's chief of security." Sarah blinked in disbelief. Elise Grayson? The same woman who had built the prison's security systems and helped ensure it was one of the most impenetrable facilities in the country. "Grayson?" Sarah repeated, her voice tinged with disbelief. "But she's one of the highest-ranking officers in the system. She was the one who helped develop all the security protocols. How could she be involved?" Ruiz took a deep breath. "I didn't believe it at first either. But think about it, Sarah. Whitley couldn't have escaped without someone inside helping him. Someone with access to the prison's security systems, and someone who had a reason to want him out." Sarah leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Grayson had always seemed like a by-the-book, no-nonsense professional. But what if she wasn't? What if she had been manipulating the entire situation from the start? "I dug into Grayson's background," Ruiz continued, "and I found something. She had access to all of the prison's schematics, locks, security systems, everything. But there's more. She's been linked to some powerful individuals outside of the prison, people with ties to the underground criminal world. Sarah's eyes widened. A criminal network? Yes. But this isn't just about crime, Sarah. Grayson's been working with a group of very high-profile individuals, some of whom have a vested interest in Whitley. This was never about a simple escape. It was about orchestrating something bigger. Something bigger? Sarah echoed, her voice low. Like what? Whitley was the key. He's not just a serial killer. He's the face of something that's been building for years, Ruiz said, her voice growing darker. Elise Grayson was working with them to use Whitley as a tool, someone who could destabilize the system. They want to create chaos, a revolution of sorts. They want to turn the world upside down. The pieces fell into place like a jigsaw puzzle. Whitley's escape had been more than just a personal goal. It was a calculated strike against the very foundation of society. And Grayson, the one person in the system who had the knowledge and the power to help him do it, had been right in the heart of the prison all along. Sarah's mind was racing now, her hands gripping the edge of her desk as the enormity of the situation settled in. We need to find Grayson, and fast. She's the key to everything. But even as Sarah spoke the words, she knew it wouldn't be easy. Grayson wasn't just some guard. She was a mastermind, someone who had been manipulating the system from within for years. And if Sarah didn't act quickly, she could be one step behind the entire time. Sarah spent the next few days combing through Grayson's records, finding connections to high-profile individuals, but not enough to make an arrest. Grayson was a ghost. Her trail was covered, and the deeper Sarah went, the more she realized that everyone in the prison, Pritchard, the guards, the contractors, had been part of a much larger conspiracy. No one could be trusted. Then, late one night, Sarah received a tip, an anonymous call. The voice on the other end was muffled, but Sarah could make out enough to understand the message. She's leaving tonight, the voice said. Grayson. She's taking Whitley to the safe house. It's happening now. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She didn't hesitate. She was already moving before the call ended. The safe house was located on the outskirts of town, an old abandoned warehouse tucked away from the prying eyes of the city. When Sarah arrived, she found the place eerily quiet, the silence broken only by the sound of her own breath as she crouched near the entrance. This was it, the final confrontation. Inside the warehouse, the lights flickered. A shadow moved along the far wall. Grayson. And there, standing beside her, was Whitley. His cold eyes met Sarah's, and for the first time, she saw something she hadn't noticed before. A hint of satisfaction, as if he had won. Grayson turned slowly, her face a mask of indifference. "You're too late, detective," she said, her voice cold. "Whitley is free, and there's nothing you can do to stop what's already been set in motion." But Sarah wasn't done yet. "You underestimated me," she said, her voice steady. "You and your network. You thought you could control this, but you're wrong. Whitley may have been the key, but I've always been 2 steps ahead." The final showdown was about to begin. Sarah wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. She was fighting for her life, for everyone's life. And she would stop at nothing to take down the mastermind behind it all. The silence in the warehouse was suffocating, the only sound being the faint hum of the broken lights overhead. Sarah's pulse raced as she took in the scene before her. Warden Grayson, the architect of the prison's downfall, standing just a few feet away, her face a perfect mask of control. And beside her, David Whitley, freed from his chains, his eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a man who had played everyone. "2 steps ahead, detective." Grayson's voice sliced through the tension. "You really think you have this figured out? It's adorable, really. But you've missed the bigger picture." Sarah's breath hitched. She'd known the game had shifted, but she hadn't fully understood how much she was in the dark until now. "The bigger picture?" she asked, her voice sharp, challenging. Grayson's smile was thin and dangerous. "You think Whitley's escape was the plan?" No. That was just a distraction. A pawn in a much larger game. A necessary one, but a pawn nonetheless." Her eyes flickered to Whitley, who stood motionless, as though savoring the drama unfolding. Sarah's stomach twisted. Whitley hadn't been trying to escape. He had been setting the stage for something more horrifying. This wasn't about a killer on the loose. This was about destruction. "You've been working with them, haven't you?" Sarah's voice was steady, but inside, a storm of confusion raged. "The people behind Whitley's escape, the underground network, you're part of it, aren't you?" Grayson nodded slowly, her expression almost pitying. "Not just part of it, Detective. I've been the one pulling the strings. The network you think is controlling Whitley? It's been my design all along. The revolution. Everything. The world you know is fragile, Detective. So fragile. And I've been waiting for the perfect moment to break it all down. Whitley was just the catalyst. The world's chaos will follow in his wake." The words hit Sarah like a slap to the face. This wasn't just about freeing Whitley. This was about breaking the prison system, the government, society itself. The pieces of Grayson's plan were finally clicking together, and each piece was more terrifying than the last. Whitley had been the decoy, the means to the end. The end was much larger, a complete societal breakdown. She took a step forward, her voice low but fierce. "You're delusional if you think you can control that kind of chaos. There are too many people involved. Too many who would stop you." Grayson's smile didn't falter. "You think I don't know that? You think I didn't plan for the fact that there would be people like you trying to stop me? This system, this fragile, broken system, is beyond saving. But it's not just about destroying it. It's about what comes after. A new order, a new world." She turned to Whitley, whose gaze never left Sarah. He seemed almost amused, as if he were watching a play unfold, savoring the tension in the air. "You don't get it," Grayson continued, her voice laced with venom. "The world needs chaos. People need to be shaken out of their complacency. Whitley will be the symbol of that chaos, a symbol that will spread like wildfire." Sarah's heart raced. Grayson wasn't just a conspirator. She was the architect of an uprising, and Whitley, his notoriety and infamy, was the match that would set it all alight. But Sarah had seen too much, fought too hard, to let Grayson get away with it. "You think you've won?" Sarah said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "But there's one thing you didn't count on." Grayson's eyebrow arched, and Whitley's expression shifted, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. Sarah smirked. "Me." Without warning, she lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the nearby metal shelving unit and pulling it toward Grayson. It crashed into the ground, creating a deafening clang that reverberated through the warehouse. In the chaos, Sarah dove to the side, using the distraction to grab her gun from her holster. Grayson hissed, diving behind a crate as Sarah raised her weapon, her eyes narrowing. "It's over, Grayson. You've lost." But as Sarah focused on Grayson, her attention split for just a moment. That moment was enough for Whitley to act. He bolted toward the back door, moving with terrifying speed. "Whitley!" Sarah shouted, but it was too late. He had already reached the door, his silhouette vanishing into the darkness outside. Grayson, now behind cover, laughed, a low, dark chuckle. "You think stopping me is that simple, Detective? You think you can stop him?" "You're wrong," Sarah snapped, her voice a growl. "The world won't follow him. Not like you think. People don't want chaos. They want justice. And I'm going to make sure that's what they get." Sarah moved swiftly, eyes never leaving Grayson. She had one chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. She tightened her grip on her gun, stepping forward carefully, cornering Grayson against a wall. "You're finished," Sarah said, a cold finality to her voice. Grayson's eyes narrowed as she slowly raised her hands in mock surrender. "You have no idea what you're stopping, Detective. This is just the beginning." With a quick, decisive move, Sarah cuffed Grayson, securing her hands behind her back. She could feel the weight of victory beginning to settle in, but it wasn't over. Whitley was still out there, and that meant the battle wasn't won yet. As she led Grayson out of the warehouse, Sarah's phone buzzed. She didn't need to check it. She already knew the news wasn't good. Whitley was already out there, somewhere in the dark, slipping away again. His escape just another step in his twisted game. But this time, it was different. Sarah wasn't playing catch-up anymore. Grayson was in custody. The mastermind behind it all had been stopped, and Sarah wasn't going to let Whitley slip through her fingers again. Sarah Miller's heart raced as she walked Grayson through the darkened warehouse, the sound of her boots echoing in the eerie silence. Grayson was eerily calm now, her head held high, her posture rigid. The woman who had once been in complete control of the situation was now a prisoner herself, shackled and defiant. But Sarah wasn't fooled. Grayson had the look of a woman who knew things were far from over. "Take her to the car," Sarah said to the officers who had accompanied her. "We're done here." As the officers moved to comply, Sarah glanced once more in the direction Whitley had disappeared. He was still out there somewhere, and she knew she wouldn't rest until he was found. She had just taken down the mastermind behind this web of chaos, but Whitley was the true key to the entire operation. Her phone buzzed again. Sarah pulled it out, her eyes scanning the text from her partner, Detective Tim Hayes. "Whitley spotted, south side of the city. Meet me at the abandoned docks." The message was clear. This was it, the final confrontation. Sarah's pulse quickened as she turned on her heels, already sprinting toward her car. The subway tunnels beneath the city were a forgotten labyrinth, dusty, decaying, and mostly abandoned. For years, they had been left to rot, their purpose long since abandoned. No one went there unless they had a reason, and that reason was rarely a good one. Detective Lena West stood at the entrance of one such forgotten tunnel, her flashlight beam cutting through the thick, musty air. The smell of damp concrete and stale water clung to her clothes, a heavy reminder of the miles of darkness stretching out beneath the city. She glanced over her shoulder at the team of officers behind her. They were all waiting for her signal, each of them on edge. Lena's reputation for solving cold cases had earned her a great deal of respect. But there was something about this case, a strange pull in the pit of her stomach, that made her uneasy. The anonymous tip had led them here. The tip itself had been cryptic, only mentioning a hidden stash of objects of interest beneath the city's heart. Lena wasn't buying the simplicity of that. The way the message had been phrased, it was clear that the tipster knew more than they were letting on. "Ready?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at her. One of the officers nodded, gripping his flashlight tighter. Lena moved forward, her boots tapping softly against the cold, cracked tiles of the tunnel floor. The beam of her flashlight flicked over the graffiti-covered walls, the discarded trash, the forgotten remnants of a once bustling city. She could feel the weight of the tunnel pressing in around her, the walls closing in. They hadn't found anything yet, but Lena knew they were close. She could feel it. And then, they came across it. A rusted metal door stood at the end of the narrow corridor. It was out of place, newer than the rest of the tunnel. A strange, almost imperceptible hum seemed to emanate from the other side. Lena gestured to the team. "Let's open it." The door creaked open, revealing a hidden room beyond. The beam of her flashlight swept across the room, but it didn't land on anything like the stolen goods they had expected. Instead, it illuminated a scene that chilled her to the core. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, but as her flashlight moved deeper into the room, the horrifying truth became clear. Dozens of human skeletons, mangled, decayed, and stacked in carefully arranged piles, were scattered across the floor. Their bones were brittle and yellowed, their positions almost deliberate. Each skeleton was positioned in a way that suggested the victims had been kept in this room for years, alive for a time, and then discarded after death. The sight of it made Lena's stomach turn. This can't be right," one of the officers muttered. Lena swallowed hard, taking a step back as her mind raced. These weren't just victims of random violence. These were people who had been tortured, kept alive, and then killed. Her heart pounded in her chest, the magnitude of the discovery sinking in. "Call the coroner," Lena said, her voice taut with disbelief. "And get the forensics team in here, now." It took only a few hours for the coroner's team to arrive and begin their examination. The smell of chemicals and disinfectants filled the room as the forensic specialists began to document the remains, carefully cataloging the bones and searching for any trace of what might have happened to the victims before their deaths. Lena stood apart from the team, her mind racing. These skeletons weren't just part of some random murder spree. There was something more at play here. She could feel it in her bones, the way the bodies were positioned, the meticulous care with which they had been stored, kept hidden for years, out of sight, out of mind. It didn't sit right with her. She turned to Dr. Alina Harper, the forensic anthropologist who had been called in to assist with the case. Alina was quiet, intense, and incredibly thorough in her work, and Lena trusted her expertise. "What do you make of this?" Lena asked, gesturing to the scattered remains. Alina sighed, pulling a pair of gloves on before examining one of the skeletons closely. Whoever did this, they weren't just killing these people. They were controlling them, keeping them alive for some reason. I can tell from the way their bones have healed over time. They were held here for months, maybe even years. These weren't quick deaths, Lena. These were prolonged. Lena's stomach turned again as she thought of the implications. So these people weren't just victims, they were captives. There's a pattern, right? Alina nodded grimly. I've been looking at the skeletal remains, comparing them to missing persons reports, and there's something disturbing. Some of these people match the profiles of high-profile missing persons from the last decade. People who were never found, who just disappeared without a trace. But there's more. The condition of the bodies, the timing of their disappearances. It's like they were part of some kind of experiment. Lena's mind raced as she thought about the missing persons cases that had piled up over the years. It was starting to make sense. The architect, the shadowy figure who had eluded law enforcement for years, had been behind all of this. But why? What twisted game was he playing? Do we have any leads? Lena asked, her voice tight. Alina hesitated, her face shadowed with worry. We have a few. There's a strange symbol, an intricate design, carved into the bones of the victims. It's like a signature, a mark of ownership. Whoever did this, they're leaving a personal stamp on their victims. Lena nodded, her determination hardening. We need to find out who the architect is, and fast. As Lena and Alina continued to dig into the case, a breakthrough came. One of the survivors, a woman who had narrowly escaped from the underground hell that the architect had built, had been located. Her name was Emily. She was pale, shaken, and barely speaking. But when Lena sat down across from her, there was something in Emily's eyes, something that spoke of unspeakable horrors. I don't know how I got out," Emily whispered, her voice hoarse. "One day I woke up and I was in this room. There were others too. So many others. Her voice faltered, and Lena leaned in, urging her to continue. "He would come in, watch us, and sometimes he'd just leave. For days, for weeks. We were never sure what was going to happen next. We were kept in the dark. He'd do things to us, experiments, I don't know. But I wasn't the only one who got out. There was a man. He helped me." Lena's heart skipped. A man? Who? Emily closed her eyes, a flicker of recognition passing over her face. "I don't know his name. He's part of the whole thing. He worked for him. But he didn't want to. He said he had to help me." Lena's pulse quickened. "The architect?" Emily nodded weakly. "He's everywhere. He controls everything." With Emily's testimony, Lena was starting to piece together a disturbing image of the architect, a mastermind who had not only built an empire of crime beneath the city, but who had a far more sinister purpose in mind. The thefts, the human trafficking, the psychological manipulation. It was all part of a much bigger plan. The investigation picked up steam, but so did the architect's game. Whoever he was watching, waiting, always several steps ahead of them. In the dead of night, Lena received another anonymous message, a picture of a map leading to a new section of the tunnels. It was clear that the architect wasn't done yet, and Lena knew, with a chilling certainty, that the next step in this twisted game would be their most dangerous yet. Lena stared at the map in her hands, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of the cryptic message. The picture had been sent to her phone in the dead of night, a cold, calculated reminder that the architect was watching. The map was detailed, every winding subway tunnel, every abandoned platform, marked with precision. But one location stood out. It was a disused station, deep beneath the city. A place so isolated it hadn't seen a train in decades. The tip had come with no explanation, no further clues. But Lena knew one thing. The architect was orchestrating something, and this was the next move in his twisted game. "We're going in," Lena said, her voice steady despite the growing tension in the pit of her stomach. She was exhausted, running on little more than adrenaline and a single-minded determination. There was no choice. They had to follow the map. They had to find him before he struck again. The subway station was miles away from the nearest civilian area, buried deep within the city's underbelly. The officers, led by Lena, followed her through the dark labyrinth of tunnels, the air heavy with the scent of old brick and stagnant water. The only sounds were the occasional scrape of boots on concrete and the hiss of the ventilation system. "This place gives me the creeps," one of the officers muttered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "I swear, it feels like something's watching us." Lena didn't reply. She could feel the weight of the silence pressing in around her too. Something was wrong. The closer they got to the station, the more the hair on the back of her neck stood on end. She had no tangible proof, but the nagging feeling in her gut told her that they were walking right into a trap. As they neared the abandoned station, the tension in the air became palpable. The tunnel ahead of them narrowed, the ceiling lowering and the walls closing in. The map had led them here, but Lena couldn't shake the feeling that they were being led into a deeper, darker part of the architect's world. The station itself was like something out of a nightmare, a place where time had stopped. Rusted tracks stretched out in front of them, disappearing into shadows. Broken lights flickered overhead, casting long, eerie shadows across the platform. It was empty, too quiet. "Stay alert," Lena whispered, signaling for the team to fan out. "Cover the perimeter. We don't know what we're dealing with here." The officers spread out, but as Lena stepped further into the station, she saw something that made her blood run cold. At the far end of the platform, beneath the flickering lights, was a single, pristine chair. It stood in stark contrast to the decrepit surroundings, clean, polished, and perfectly placed in the center of the room. Lena's flashlight beam flicked over the chair, and then she noticed the faintest traces of blood on the ground, leading toward it. Her heart skipped. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture. Someone had been here recently. Before she could move, a loud mechanical noise echoed from the tunnel ahead, cutting through the silence. A train? No, this was different. The sound was too deep, too resonant. It sounded more like machinery being activated. Lena held up her hand, signaling the team to stop. "Check the back rooms," she ordered quietly. "Move fast. We don't know what we're walking into." They made their way deeper into the station, moving cautiously through the dark, musty corridors that branched off from the platform. The walls here were even older, the rust more pronounced, and the atmosphere heavier. Lena felt the hairs on the back of her neck prickle. This place had the feeling of a forgotten world, a world built by someone with a deep understanding of human psychology and fear. Whoever the architect was, he had designed this place not just to hide things, but to instill fear, to remind people that they were at his mercy. Suddenly, a sound broke the stillness, a faint click followed by a mechanical whirring. Lena's heart dropped. She had heard that sound before, but it had been in her nightmares, the sound of something closing in. Before she could react, the ground beneath them trembled. The walls shifted with a low grinding noise as part of the platform began to descend. A hidden elevator shaft opened up beneath them, sending a wave of cold air up toward their feet. "Get back!" Lena shouted, but it was too late. A figure emerged from the depths of the shadowed platform, a tall, slender silhouette that moved with chilling precision. The architect. Lena's breath caught in her throat as the figure stepped into the light. It was him, the man they had been hunting for years. But there was something different about him now. His eyes glinted with cold intelligence, calculating every move they made. He wasn't just a criminal. He was a genius, a puppet master pulling every string. "Detective West," he said, his voice smooth, almost amused. "I've been expecting you." Lena gritted her teeth, stepping forward. "We know what you've done, architect. We know about the bodies, the torture. It's over." The architect smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only cold, detached amusement. "Over? You think it's over?" "No, detective. This is only the beginning." His voice echoed through the station, sending a ripple of unease through the officers behind her. The architect wasn't just playing a game. He had orchestrated this entire encounter. They had walked into his trap. "You've been chasing shadows," the architect continued. "But the truth, detective, is that you were never meant to catch me. You were meant to be part of my plan. You see, I'm not just building an empire of crime. I'm building a legacy, a new world order." Lena's stomach twisted. She couldn't understand. What was he talking about? He had committed horrific crimes, but this was something else entirely. This was madness. "You think you're some kind of genius," Lena spat. "You're just a sick murderer hiding in the shadows." The architect's smile never wavered. "Murderer? Number, I'm an artist, and you, detective, are my masterpiece. Before Lena could react, the ground beneath them shifted again. The elevator platform began to rise, and a heavy metal door slid open behind the architect. From the shadows, figures began to emerge, figures dressed in dark clothing, their faces obscured. Lena realized with horror that she was surrounded. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was an execution. The architect had orchestrated this entire moment, using their pursuit as a way to draw them into his lair. You've done well to get this far, the architect continued, his tone cold and detached. But now, you'll see how small you really are in the grand design. This city will crumble, and I will be the one to watch it burn. Lena's mind raced. She knew she was facing a man who had anticipated every move. The moment they stepped into this station, they had been playing his game. There was no going back. But there had to be a way out. There had to be something, anything, that could stop this madness. Her eyes flicked over the station, looking for anything that could give her an advantage. Her mind was working in overdrive, calculating each option, each move. In that instant, she saw it. A control panel, hidden behind a rusted door near the far end of the station. It was small, unassuming, but Lena recognized the familiar layout of the emergency shutdown controls. She knew exactly what to do. "Move," Lena barked, throwing herself toward the panel, her hand reaching for the button. Before she could press it, a loud bang echoed in the room. A shot rang out, and Lena felt a sharp pain in her shoulder. She staggered, her vision blurring for a moment, but she forced herself to stay upright. The architect's men were closing in, but she couldn't stop now. Her hand slammed against the button, and for a split second, everything went black. The world around Lena turned to chaos. The moment her finger pressed the button, the room plunged into a terrifying, oppressive darkness. The emergency power shutdown had been activated, cutting off the dim lights that had flickered over the station. A complete blackout. The sudden silence was deafening. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears as she staggered, trying to steady herself. Pain shot through her shoulder from the bullet wound, but she couldn't afford to stop now. Not when she was so close to stopping the architect. Lena's fingers grazed the cold concrete, trying to push herself upright. The air smelled metallic, the tang of blood mixing with the musty scent of the underground world that had become her battleground. "Get to the exits," she shouted, though her voice felt small and fragile in the vast emptiness of the station. She could hear the scramble of footsteps. Her team was responding. But it was too late. They had walked straight into a trap, and now the very walls seemed to be closing in around them. The architect was everywhere and nowhere at once, the mastermind who had set the pieces in motion. Lena knew the truth now. He was more than just a criminal. He was a strategist, playing a game with lives, with fate itself. A metallic scraping noise echoed from behind her, cutting through the dark. She whirled around, trying to catch a glimpse of movement, but there was nothing, just the shadows. The architect was toying with her. He didn't need the lights to see. He was in his element now. A voice slithered out from the darkness, smooth, unsettling, and far too close for comfort. "Did you think you could shut me down so easily, detective? You're playing by my rules now. You always have been." Lena's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just a voice. It was the voice she had been hunting for months. The voice that would end this game. The architect. She blinked, trying to make out the outlines of the station through the inky blackness. But the tunnel had swallowed all light. Her flashlight had gone out, and her vision was clouded with pain. She was alone in this dark, twisted space. "No," Lena said, her voice low but unwavering. "I don't play by anyone's rules, not yours, not anymore." A low chuckle rippled through the air. The sound was cold, detached. "You still don't understand, do you? You're just a pawn. I'm not interested in making you my enemy, detective. I've given you every opportunity to join me. But you, like everyone else, can't see the bigger picture." Lena's mind raced, her body protesting with every step as she forced herself to move, ignoring the pain in her shoulder. She knew the architect was out there, close, somewhere in the dark. She could feel his presence like a shadow that watched her every move. "We're not alike," Lena said, her voice hard with resolve. "You're nothing more than a murderer and a manipulator. You use people, control them. You're sick." The chuckle turned into a hiss, a sharp intake of breath. "Sick? Number, I'm something much more dangerous. I'm a visionary. You'll see, detective. Soon, you'll see exactly what I've been building." Lena's instincts kicked in. She couldn't afford to let him continue speaking, to let him manipulate her thoughts. The architect had a way of twisting reality, of making you question everything, but she wasn't going to fall for it. Not now. Not when they were this close to ending this nightmare. She moved toward the sound of his voice, every muscle tensed. The darkness felt suffocating, but Lena was used to the weight of the unknown. She had been in worse places, had faced bigger monsters, and she had always come out on top. Another sound, more distinct this time, a footstep. No, it wasn't a footstep. It was the sound of something metallic scraping across the floor. Lena's blood ran cold. She barely had time to react before a rush of movement came toward her. The architect, or one of his operatives, lunged from the dark. Lena sidestepped just in time, her instincts guiding her, but her injured shoulder screamed in protest. "Got you!" the figure hissed, the words venomous. She pivoted, ducking beneath the man's grasp, and in a split second, her gun was drawn. The barrel flared with a loud crack as she fired, the bullet piercing the darkness. The figure dropped with a sickening thud. But it wasn't the architect. It was one of his shadowy followers, the same faceless minions who had been working for him all along. The architect's laugh rang out from the far side of the room, low and menacing. "You've just played right into my hands, detective. You have no idea what you've unleashed." Lena's pulse quickened. He wasn't just threatening her. He was promising something worse, and she had no time left to figure out what it was. The air around her suddenly shifted. A faint noise, almost imperceptible at first, drew her attention to the far side of the station. A low, rumbling sound, as though something massive was starting to stir. The ground trembled beneath her feet, and she felt the walls vibrate with the hum of something heavy, moving through the tunnel. "Oh no," Lena whispered under her breath. She knew this sound. It was a train, an old subway train, powered by some unknown mechanism, long abandoned, but now being brought to life by the architect. The train had been hidden, waiting for this moment. She whipped around, aiming toward the sound of the train, but there was nothing there yet, only the rumble growing louder, closer. Then she saw it, lights in the distance, growing brighter. "Everyone out!" Lena shouted into the darkness, her voice rising in urgency. "Move, now!" Her team, alerted by the rising tension, began to retreat, but the train was coming too fast. A blur of metal, the roar of the engines, and then the screech of the wheels as they skidded toward her, an unstoppable force of chaos and destruction. Lena spun, her heart racing. She had no time to think, no time to calculate. Every second felt like an eternity. And then, just as the train loomed close enough to swallow her whole, a hand grasped her arm, pulling her roughly to the side. It was Emily, the survivor. "Come on," she cried, her face pale but resolute. "I know a way out." Lena didn't question her. She followed, her body protesting as they sprinted down a side corridor. They were almost at the end of the tunnel when the train roared past them, barely missing their heels. They didn't stop running until they reached an exit, another forgotten door, at the farthest point of the station. Emily swung it open, and they stumbled into the cold night air above ground, gasping for breath. Behind them, the rumbling of the train faded into the distance. Lena didn't look back. She couldn't. Not yet. The architect was still out there, somewhere in the dark, his twisted game far from over. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she had a moment to breathe, to think. And then, as she stared at the city skyline in the distance, something settled in her chest. The architect was going to come for them again. But this time, Lena was ready. The cold night air bit at Lena's skin as she stood on the abandoned street corner, her breath visible in the frigid air. She and Emily had made it out of the underground hellscape, but it wasn't over, not by a long shot. The architect's empire of fear, secrecy, and death stretched far beyond the subway tunnels, and now Lena was more determined than ever to bring it down. She could still hear the sound of the train's roar echoing in her ears, the rattling, deafening reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. She clutched her shoulder. The bullet wound throbbed with every movement, but it didn't matter. The adrenaline was still pumping through her veins. She was alive, and that was all that mattered. Behind her, the officers who had survived the nightmare filtered out of the subway station, their faces grim, covered in dirt and sweat, but their eyes burning with the same determination that fueled her. They had been shaken, yes, but not broken. The architect had tried to crush them with his game, but they weren't playing by his rules anymore. "Emily," Lena began, turning to the young woman beside her. Emily had been a victim, one of the unlucky souls the architect had captured and tormented, but she had survived. She was proof that there was hope in the middle of all the darkness. "I need you to take me to the place where he's been hiding everything, his headquarters. We have to find it before he comes after us again." Emily hesitated. Her eyes darted to the ground. "I don't know where it is. Not exactly. But I know who does." Lena's eyebrows furrowed. "Who?" Emily's lips quivered. "The survivors. We're not the only ones who escaped. There's a group of us, people who were kept alive. They've all been hidden away, but some of them, they were let go. I was one of the lucky ones. If we find them, they'll know where to go." Lena's heart skipped a beat. The architect's web was far bigger than she had anticipated. He hadn't just been running his operations from the tunnels. He had been building a network, and if he had kept survivors alive, kept them in his grasp, they would know everything. "Then let's find them," Lena said, her voice low but firm. "Let's stop this nightmare once and for all." It wasn't long before Lena and her team found the survivors. They had been living on the fringes of the city, abandoned, forgotten, traumatized. These were people whose lives had been shattered, who had become pawns in the architect's twisted game. They had been his test subjects, his trophies, his tools. Among them was Michael, a man whose body was covered in scars from the months he had spent at the architect's hands. His eyes were dull and haunted, but as he spoke of his time in the underground prison, there was a fire in his words. "He wanted to break us, all of us," Michael said, his voice rough. "He wanted to show us that we could be controlled, that we weren't as strong as we thought. He thought he was invincible. He thought he could destroy anyone, make them crawl at his feet. But he didn't count on us surviving. He didn't count on you. Lena's chest tightened. She could see the anger in Michael's eyes. The architect had made a grave mistake by underestimating the strength of the human spirit. "We're going to end this," Lena said, her voice soft but resolute. "We'll take him down. Together." Michael nodded, his eyes hardening. He's hiding in plain sight. He's already set up his final move. It's not just about the underground anymore. It's about control, about taking everything, every single person, down with him if he falls. He's set a trap, and it's already in motion. It's been in motion for years. Lena's heart pounded in her chest. Everything she had thought she knew about the architect's operations was now in question. He wasn't just trying to escape capture. He was creating a collapse, a destruction of the entire city, a statement. If he couldn't control it, he would bring it to its knees. "Where?" Lena asked, her voice tight. "Where is he?" Michael stared at her, and for a brief moment, it felt like time had stopped. He swallowed hard before speaking. "The city's power grid. It's the heart of everything. The architect is planning to detonate a series of devices that will plunge the entire city into darkness. No lights, no communications, anarchy. His final game." Lena's breath caught in her throat. She knew the grid, the power plants, the substations, the entire infrastructure that kept the city running. If the architect could trigger a citywide blackout, there would be nothing left to stop him. And with the chaos that would follow, he could disappear again, unseen, his legacy unchallenged. "We need to get to the power station. Now," Lena said, her eyes burning with determination. Emily stepped forward. "I can help you get inside. There's an entrance hidden beneath one of the substation buildings. He's been preparing for this for months." Lena nodded, motioning to the team. They would make their move. The final confrontation was coming, and the architect had played his hand. But it wasn't over. Not yet. The power station loomed ahead, a monolithic structure that hummed with quiet energy. Lena and her team, flanked by the survivors, made their way to the entrance, hidden beneath the ground. Every step felt like it was drawing them closer to the heart of the storm, the place where everything would either end or be lost forever. As they entered the subterranean maze beneath the power plant, the air grew colder, the hum of the electricity vibrating beneath their feet. The walls were lined with wires, thick cables snaking through the space, a reminder of how fragile the city's delicate infrastructure truly was. One wrong move, and it could all come crashing down. Emily led the way, her face grim but determined. She knew this place, had lived beneath it. Her knowledge of the tunnels was the only thing that would guide them now. "We need to find the control room," Lena said, scanning their surroundings. "That's where the trigger will be." But as they moved deeper into the plant, it became clear that they weren't alone. The architect's presence lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. Every turn, every hallway, seemed to echo with the sound of his voice, his machinations slowly closing in. A voice came over the loudspeakers, distorted and cold, like an old radio signal cutting through static. "Detective West, I thought you would make it here. But this is where it ends, you see. This is where the game concludes." Lena froze, her breath caught in her chest. The architect was watching them. He was always watching. "You think you're the hero, detective?" The architect's voice oozed mockery. "But in the end, you'll learn the truth. I'm not the villain. I'm the savior. This city needed to be freed. It needed to be purged." Lena's fists clenched. "You're not a savior, architect. You're a monster, and you're going to pay for everything." The voice on the loudspeaker laughed, a high, cruel sound. "You think you're in control? You think you can stop me? You've only just begun to understand the game. The air around them crackled with energy. The countdown had begun. Move now, Lena shouted. She could hear the ticking clock in her head, the final moments ticking away, before everything was destroyed. In the final moments, Lena and her team stormed the control room. The architect was there, waiting. His face was a mask of cold precision, eyes gleaming with the knowledge of his near victory. But as Lena advanced, her gun raised, her voice steady, she knew this was it. This was the end of the game. A final, deadly clash. The architect's downfall. And as the lights flickered one last time, Lena's world went dark. The air inside the auction house was thick with tension. Every breath of the guests weighed down by a secret longing for something they could never fully understand. The place was a paradox, luxurious, yet suffocating, and at the same time, steeped in an eerie atmosphere that none of the high-profile attendees could shake off. The velvet curtains, dim chandeliers, and polished floors made it all seem like a dream. But beneath the surface, something darker lurked, something no one could quite name. The auction was already in full swing, but everyone in the room knew the true star of the evening had yet to be revealed. Detective Rachel Monroe stood just inside the grand hall, her eyes scanning the crowd, feeling out of place among the elite. The rich and powerful filled the room, wearing their finest attire, but Rachel's presence wasn't for the luxury of it all. She wasn't there for the fine art or the rare antiques. She was there for something much darker. The Dark Lily. It was the necklace that had haunted her since she first heard about it. The artifact with a reputation so twisted, it made Rachel question the sanity of anyone who would even think of bidding on it. The Dark Lily was rumored to be cursed, crafted centuries ago by an infamous alchemist with a penchant for forbidden rituals. Its sapphire centerpiece, a flower-shaped gem, was said to glow faintly when touched by moonlight. A dazzling creation, no doubt. But at what cost? The cursed necklace had claimed the lives of its previous owners, rich men, scholars, even those who tried to sell it off in desperate haste. Each had died under strange, violent, and often unexplained circumstances. Rachel wasn't one to believe in curses, but she had seen enough of the world's darkness to know that some things were better left untouched. As she walked through the room, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor, she noticed the murmurs, whispers traveling from one bidder to another. Everyone knew the Dark Lily would soon be unveiled, and even the most hardened criminals seemed unnerved by its presence. At the front of the hall, on a raised pedestal, stood the auctioneer, a tall, gaunt man with pale skin and sharp features. His slicked-back hair caught the light, but his expression was as unreadable as the necklace in the display case. His name was Charles Hargrave, and he had been known for running these underground auctions for years. No one knew much about him, but his reputation as a collector of rare and dangerous artifacts had made him a legend in the shadow world of art and antiquities. Hargrave raised his hand, signaling for the crowd to quiet down. His voice was smooth as silk, carrying the weight of authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "we come to the piece you've all been waiting for, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The Dark Lily, the legendary necklace, lost to time and myth, has resurfaced, and tonight it can be yours." Rachel felt a chill settle in her chest. She had come here to investigate a string of suspicious disappearances linked to the auction house, and, specifically, to this cursed artifact. The previous owners had all vanished or died in horrific ways, their deaths shrouded in mystery. But now, as she watched the bidders crowd around the pedestal, she realized the truth was far darker than anyone had imagined. The dark lily wasn't just an object of obsession, it was a trap, one that would ensnare anyone foolish enough to lay claim to it. The auctioneer slowly unveiled the necklace, and gasps echoed around the room as the deep blue gemstone caught the light. The flower-shaped pendant shimmered ominously, its petals curving inward as if drawing the light, and the souls of those who gazed at it, into its depths. The room grew colder, the tension palpable, as the first bid was placed. As the auction began, the bidding war over the dark lily intensified. The wealthy and powerful gathered in groups, whispering excitedly, each eager to own the necklace. But Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. It wasn't just the stories about the curse. It was the way the people in the room were behaving. They were too desperate, too obsessed. A billionaire named Victor Castellanos, a regular at these underground auctions, was the first to raise his hand. His reputation preceded him, ruthless, cold-hearted, and known for acquiring rare artifacts at any cost. He had a dark past, a history Rachel had been investigating for months. He was a man who would kill for the right piece, and the dark lily seemed to be his obsession. Another bidder, a historian named Dr. Evelyn Winters, had a different kind of obsession. She had dedicated her career to uncovering the dark lily's origins, convinced that the necklace held the key to unlocking ancient secrets of alchemy and dark magic. Her passion was palpable, and she was willing to pay any price to unravel its mysteries. But there was something unsettling about her obsession. She looked more like someone on the brink of madness than a reputable academic. Her eyes darted nervously between the other bidders, her fingers twitching as though she couldn't control the need to possess the necklace. The bids continued to climb. Rachel observed them all, noting the way each bidder seemed drawn to the necklace, as if they were hypnotized. But it wasn't just their greed. Something darker was at work, something supernatural. It wasn't until an hour into the auction that things took a violent turn. One of the bidders, a young man named Jack Calloway, suddenly collapsed, his body jerking violently on the floor. The room fell into chaos. Screams echoed through the hall as people rushed to his side. But when they touched him, his body was ice cold. His eyes were wide open, but lifeless. Rachel felt her blood run cold as she pushed her way through the crowd to the fallen man's side. She knelt down beside him, trying to find any sign of life, but there was nothing, just the haunting emptiness of his stare. The auctioneer remained unmoved, his face blank, as though he had expected this. "Please clear the room," Rachel shouted to the staff, but they didn't respond. Her eyes flickered to Hargrave, who was still standing by the pedestal, his eyes locked on the necklace with a look of longing. Was he behind this? Before she could make another move, another bidder, a woman named Isabella Green, slipped into unconsciousness, her face contorted in terror. Her body was dragged from the room, and Rachel realized with horror that there was something more than just physical harm at play here. The dark lily was beginning its work. The curse wasn't just a myth, it was a deadly reality, consuming the lives of those who sought to control it. Rachel felt a deep sense of urgency wash over her. She couldn't let it continue. She needed to get answers, and fast. With the auction in disarray, Rachel demanded a meeting with Hargrave in his office. The room was luxurious but sterile, the polished wooden desk reflecting the dim light from the chandeliers above. Hargrave stood by the window, his back turned, as if he were waiting for her. "Detective Monroe," he said, his voice smooth, unfazed by the chaos in the auction hall. "I trust you've had a memorable experience this evening." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "You knew something like this would happen, didn't you?" Hargrave turned, his expression unreadable. "What happens at my auctions is none of my concern. The dark lily has a life of its own. It has always claimed those who seek it." Rachel's pulse quickened. "You knew it was cursed? You knew it would kill people, and you let them bid on it anyway?" Hargrave's lips curled into a smile, but there was no warmth in it. People like to believe in curses. It gives them a reason for their failures, a reason for their greed. But in reality, Detective, the dark lily is far more than just a relic. It is the key to power, power that can transcend death itself. Rachel froze. "What are you talking about?" Hargrave stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. "The necklace was crafted by an alchemist long ago, a man who sought to defy the laws of nature. The necklace's curse is not just death, it's a gateway. Whoever controls it will have the power to manipulate life and death, to control fate itself." Rachel felt a chill creep down her spine. "You're insane." Hargrave chuckled darkly. "No, Detective. I'm merely the first to see the truth. And now, you are too." As Rachel raced to uncover the truth, the situation in the auction house spiraled out of control. The remaining bidders began to panic, accusing each other of sabotage and betrayal. Paranoia gripped the room, and it became clear that the dark lily was far more than just a cursed artifact. It was a catalyst for chaos, pushing everyone to the brink of madness. Rachel needed to stop Hargrave and the auction before it was too late. The lives of everyone in that room were on the line, and she couldn't let the necklace claim another victim. But as the final confrontation loomed, Rachel realized something terrifying. The dark lily wasn't just a relic to be sold. It was a symbol of something much darker, a warning that no one was safe from its curse. And as the auction house descended into chaos, Rachel would have to make a choice, one that could save her life or damn her forever. Rachel's mind raced as she left Hargrave's office, a torrent of thoughts swirling inside her head. The idea that the dark lily wasn't just an object, but a tool for controlling life and death, was beyond anything she'd ever encountered. But Hargrave's words lingered in her mind, sending chills down her spine. Whoever controls it will have the power to manipulate life and death, to control fate itself. She shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. There had to be a way to stop this, some way to break the curse before it spread any further. But with each passing minute, the reality of what she was facing began to sink in. The curse was real, and Hargrave wasn't just a collector. He was a man driven by something far more dangerous. Back in the main hall, the atmosphere had deteriorated. The once elegant auction room now resembled a war zone. The remaining bidders, those who hadn't already fallen victim to the dark lily's curse, were fighting among themselves. Some were scrambling to leave, while others huddled together, their faces pale, whispering in panicked tones. Rachel's eyes scanned the room, searching for familiar faces. There was Castellanos, standing near the back, his expression dark with anger and fear. Dr. Winters was perched on the edge of a table, shaking uncontrollably. But it was the woman in the corner who caught Rachel's attention, Isabella Green. The woman's eyes were wide, but she wasn't speaking. She wasn't even moving. Rachel felt a pang of dread. Green had been one of the most vocal bidders, and her obsession with the dark lily had been evident from the moment she entered. Now, she looked as if she were staring into the abyss itself. Rachel's heart thudded painfully in her chest. She knew the clock was ticking, but she couldn't ignore the pull of curiosity. There was something in Green's eyes that unsettled her, a depth of terror that was different from the others. She pushed her way through the crowd, approaching the woman cautiously. "Isabella?" Rachel asked, her voice soft, but firm. The woman's head snapped toward Rachel, her pupils dilated with panic. You don't understand. It's not just the necklace. It's the auction. It's all connected. Hargrave, he's using us. Rachel knelt down in front of her. What do you mean? What is Hargrave really doing here? Green's lips trembled as she whispered, "The dark lily isn't just a necklace. It's part of a ritual, one that's been going on for decades. Hargrave is trying to awaken something that's been dormant for centuries." Rachel's stomach twisted. What are you talking about? What is he trying to awaken? Green swallowed hard, looking around nervously. The necklace was created by the alchemist, but it's not the necklace itself that holds the power. It's the ritual tied to it. Hargrave plans to complete the ritual tonight. Once the final bid is made, the power of the dark lily will be transferred to him. He'll control it all. Everything. Rachel stood up quickly, the weight of Green's words crashing down on her. Hargrave wasn't just trying to make a profit. He wasn't just a collector. He was orchestrating a dangerous ritual that would give him control over death, fate, and the supernatural forces the dark lily was tied to. She turned to leave, but Green's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. "You can't stop him," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No one can. Once the ritual starts, it's too late." Rachel yanked her arm away, her pulse quickening. "I have to try." Rachel sprinted down the hall, pushing past the remaining guests who were too terrified to leave. She couldn't afford to waste any more time. Hargrave was somewhere in the building, and she needed to stop him before he could complete the ritual. But where was he? He had to be in the heart of the auction house, in a place where the final bid would be made, the place where the curse would reach its apex. The auction hall was a labyrinth of corridors, rooms, and hidden spaces. Rachel's eyes darted to the walls as she moved, the floor beneath her feet creaking ominously with every step. The sounds of muffled conversations and frantic footsteps filled the air. But there was one noise that stood out, the low hum of something ancient, something dark. It was coming from the basement. Without thinking, Rachel descended the staircase, her hand gripping the railing tightly. The deeper she went, the colder the air became. The hum grew louder, and soon she could make out words, chanted incantations, spoken in a language she didn't recognize. It was a ritual, and it was happening right beneath her feet. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, she was met by a door, a heavy wooden barrier, adorned with intricate carvings. The symbols were unmistakable. Rachel's blood ran cold. They were alchemical symbols, ones that were said to be linked to immortality, resurrection, and forbidden magic. The dark lily wasn't just an artifact. It was a key to something far worse than Rachel could have imagined. She pushed the door open. Inside, a large circular chamber stood before her. In the center of the room, the dark lily lay on a stone altar, its petals glowing faintly. Around the altar were Hargrave and a group of hooded figures, their hands raised in the air as they chanted. Hargrave stood at the forefront, his eyes closed in concentration, the necklace glowing brighter with each passing second. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest. She had found him. Hargrave opened his eyes and saw her standing there, his lips curling into a sinister smile. "Ah, Detective Monroe," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "I wondered when you would show up. You see, I've been expecting you." Rachel's mind raced as she pulled out her gun, aiming it directly at Hargrave. "This ends now. Step away from the necklace." Hargrave chuckled softly. "You think you can stop this? You think you can stop me from achieving immortality? This is bigger than you, Detective. You have no idea what you're up against." Rachel's finger tightened on the trigger, but before she could pull it, One of the hooded figures moved toward her. She fired, but the bullet seemed to hit an invisible barrier and ricochet harmlessly to the side. The room seemed to pulse with dark energy, and Rachel felt an invisible weight pushing down on her chest. The figures in the room began to chant louder, their voices growing in intensity. The air thickened, and Rachel felt as though the walls themselves were closing in on her. She backed up against the door, struggling to breathe. She was losing control. The dark lily was too powerful. Hargrave raised his arms as the glow from the necklace intensified. "You're too late, detective. The ritual is complete." Rachel's vision blurred, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble. The necklace glowed brighter than ever before, its petals flickering as if they were alive. She could hear whispers in her mind, thousands of voices, each one pleading for release, for freedom. They were trapped within the curse, prisoners to the necklace's power. Then, something in Rachel snapped. She didn't know where the strength came from, but she knew she had no time left. With everything she had left, she lunged for the altar, grabbing the dark lily before Hargrave could react. The instant her fingers touched the pendant, the world seemed to explode. The room erupted with blinding light. Rachel screamed, her body racked with pain as the power of the dark lily coursed through her veins. It felt like every cell in her body was on fire, every part of her being unraveling. The voices in her mind screamed for release, but Rachel fought back. She would not let this necklace control her. She would not let Hargrave win. With every ounce of strength she had left, Rachel ripped the necklace from her neck and threw it to the ground, shattering the gemstone into 1,000 pieces. The moment it hit the floor, the light exploded outward, sending Hargrave and the hooded figures flying backwards. Hargrave roared in fury as the darkness in the room dissolved, leaving only silence. The power of the dark lily had been broken. Rachel awoke hours later, lying on the cold stone floor of the auction house's basement. The room was now quiet, the eerie energy that had once filled it gone. Hargrave and his followers were gone, their bodies found later, lifeless and drained of any energy. The dark lily had been destroyed, but its legacy would linger forever. As Rachel walked away from the auction house, she knew one thing for certain. Some artifacts were better left forgotten. The curse of the dark lily had been broken, but its true power, the power to corrupt, to control, and to consume, would always haunt the world. And she would never forget the darkness she had uncovered beneath the surface.